Hello there, welcome. Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. I am Peter Adkison. Our guest today is Richard Garfield, and my co-host is Emma Larkins. As you know, on this story, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games, and we are continuing our coverage of Magic the Gathering. And of course, who better to have on a show about Magic the Gathering than Richard. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Now, what's your first untold story? No, I'm just kidding.
Just dive right into it.
You're going to have to work to pull them out of me.
I'm going to have to work. Yeah, so we've definitely set the bar really high today because Richard has been interviewed certainly more than me, and I've been interviewed a lot, but probably 10 times as much as I have, relating to Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast. But I think we can do it. So,
Yeah.
but let's start with some basics. Before we try to get to the nuances and untold bits. I want to start before Magic, before Wizards of the Coast. Who was Richard Garfield?
Well, I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania in mathematics, and I had already decided that my future lay in academics as opposed to game design, because games in general seemed like a really poor place to stake your future. And yeah, I turned out to be very wrong in that, or at least I got very lucky. It probably was probabilistically the right play. And in fact, probably my attention to games based on love of games and interest in games, as opposed to trying to make a living, probably helped me in some ways. Right. But I really took game playing seriously and took the research seriously, and it was more than just whatever games were out there. I loved reading old card books about old games and figuring out what made them fun, what made them tick, and I had a friend, a good friend, Mike Davis, who fell in love with one of my designs, Robo Rally, and he took it upon himself to get it published.
And I seem to recall, I've heard this story, of course. I remember talking to Mike, which we all miss him dearly. Mike told me that he had a deal with you that if he could get, that he had tried to urge you into getting your games published, that you didn't want to be bothered with that nonsense. And he said, and you said, well, you can own half of Robo Rally if you go out and find a publisher. Is that a fair summary of that?
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Nice.
And he got half of Robo Rally, and he thought that was a very generous offer. And then 7 years later, after dealing with over 7 different publishers, he thought it was probably a fair offer.
But I think we might have paid you in stock for Robo Rally, in which case it might have been an amazing offer.
Yeah. No. Certainly. In the end, it probably worked out fine. That journey to find a publisher for Robo Rally put him in contact with Peter, and therefore me in contact with Peter.
Right. So that gets us to the origin story, and we talked the other day about this interview, getting ready for this interview, and we both commented that the origin story of Magic the Gathering is like a creation myth. We need like a burning bush.
Yeah.
So we can embellish the creation story. By the way, we could take this in full blown mythology if we like.
And on the third day.
And on the third day, yes.
You're allowed to do that?
Yes, we can, because somebody, a historian will come back later and set all the records straight. So we might as well give them something to work with, right?
To debug.
Yeah, to debug. Yeah, give them something to debug. Okay, a debug. Yeah. So let's. What I'm thinking is that let's talk, because the origin story. We both are actors in this story, and so I think we just kind of alternate our bits of the moving trains as they head towards collision, right? So in this, Mike's been off trying to find a publisher for Robo Rally. I start this little RPG company in Seattle, Wizards of the Coast, and I get on a Usenet back before when the internet and before Facebook and all this stuff. We hung out on Usenet and had conversations on the internet back in the early '90s. So 1991, I'm on a Usenet forum about game design, and I ended up talking about Wizards of the Coast and what we were doing. And Mike Davis reaches out to me and says, hey, I'm pitching this game called Robo Rally that my friend Richard Garfield designed. And I almost we have no interest in board games. I had no interest in doing board games at the time because I was completely intimidated by the work of doing an RPG. So the idea of doing a board game just kind of messed with my head. So, but he said they were both grad students in mathematics, and that was the key. Like, I like really smart people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, what did Mike tell you before we met about like what we were going to meet? We were going to meet in Portland. We set up a meeting in Portland. What did he tell you going into that?
Well, to clarify, Mike was not a grad student.
That's right. He was working at
Bell Labs.
Bell Labs.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where I met him. I worked for 2 years after my undergraduate years at Bell Labs, and he was a.
But he had a master's, right?
He had, I believe he had 3 masters. He's a very smart guy. So the essence of what you're saying is true. That you might have been drawn to him because he seemed to be pretty smart. He was very smart.
Yeah.
And he told me that one of the reasons he was interested in meeting with you is because our most recent failure to get it published was with FASA. And FASA had bought the game. They'd actually paid us some money, and then eventually, when they got around to it, they returned it to us. And part of the sticking point was that they wanted to make it. They wanted to put Robo Rally on a hex board, and they wanted to make it a cyberpunk themed game. And they had a lot of, and they were trying to tie it into their other game lines.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to go to you because he said, I want somebody who doesn't have any pre-existing lines to work with, and so they won't have any preconceptions about how we should play this.
Right.
And so that's basically what he told me about you.
Already an untold for me. I had not heard that story. So hey, we're doing good.
Yeah.
We're only 8 minutes in. I've always heard. Okay, so we ended up meeting in Portland. I was living in Seattle. Your parents lived in Portland, and your father still lives in Portland. The
That's
same
right.
house, right?
Yes.
Yes. And is this the house you grew up in?
Yes.
So even though you were going to school at University of Pennsylvania, you were coming home to see your family.
Visit folks. Yeah.
Mike tagged along.
Yeah.
And I drove down to Portland, and I remember the house. First of all, it's a beautiful house. Always love beautiful houses. I was raised, I think fondly of where I was raised, my grandparents' house in Idaho. And I remember.
I was just there yesterday.
I remember you and Mike coming I have this image of you and Mike coming down the stairs of this house. And because we left right away. We went to a park or something, if I remember right. Yeah, you don't.
I don't remember. I remember.
It was a park. Yep, it was a park. Yes. Anyway.
I remember meeting you twice in with a short interval in between, and I didn't even remember that one of them was in Portland. I for some reason, I have it as I went to Seattle, and then a couple weeks later, for some reason, I was in Seattle again, which doesn't make any sense because I had no reason to be in Seattle other than to.
So that's an alternate theory of events, alternate history, right? Yeah. So I came down to Portland, and we went to a park and we talked about games, and I remember I knew I was gonna reject Robo Rally, to say it in the harshest terms, right? Sorry, but for reasons of being intimidated by the thought of making a board game. And also being, and at the same time, I was going to ask you for money. That's the life of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm raising money. I'm not going to publish your games. How would you like to invest?
Wow.
You got a nice house you got there, Richard.
Very,
I don't know.
I'd say that's a probably high character of you, though. That you seek out intelligent people to get investments. That's what drew you to us, rather than they sound really dumb.
Yeah.
That's a good character reference. So in the course of that conversation, and I think it was mainly a conversation between Mike and I, and you were a bit quiet, like is often the case when I was talking to Mike. I remember at one point you said, "Well, Peter, I like all games. What type of game would you like?" You said something. I don't remember the exact wording, but you said something to the effect of like, "Okay, if you don't like this game, give me a challenge. I'll design anything you want to." And I remember you telling me, I remember asking you in kind of a gamer sort of elitist sort of a way, you know, like you judge people based on what type of games they play. And so I remember asking you saying, well, what do you like to play? And your response was that you liked all games. And anything from Dungeons and Dragons to poker to board games. And to me that was like, oh, wow, that's like, yes, now I love all games. Do you remember that?
That sounds, I do not remember it in particular, but it is something I identified with myself at that time. I very early on took it upon myself to not only to learn all the games that were out there, but learn what made them fun. And so when I came across a new game that I didn't enjoy, I would play it again and again until I learned what made it, what made people who liked it like it, because they're not wrong, right? So they must understand something about it that I didn't. And part of that, I think, originally was driven by how few games there were and my limited resources. Like if I spent $20 on a game when I was earning $1 a day delivering newspapers, and I didn't like it, well, I'm going to play it again and again and again. I'm going to learn what makes it fun. But that carried me, through to today.
Right. So, so we part ways at that point. Probably not sure we'd ever see each other again. And then my memory of what happens next. But interrupt me any time you think of something in the middle of this. About 3 days later, you called me on the telephone. We used phones back in those days. Yeah.
That's right.
And you...
I dialed you.
Yes, you dialed
the
me.
dial,
Yes,
yeah.
you dialed me. Yes, you dialed me. And you said, Peter, I have an idea for... Oh, well, in response to your game, well, we left out the answer to your question. You'd asked me what sort of game I would like. And I said, well... and here I always put in a caveat, I'm not taking any credit for the invention of Magic the Gathering, but I did say a card game with a science fiction or fantasy film theme that had only cards, something you could play while you're waiting for your dungeon master to show up, or play it in lines at conventions and stuff like that. So do you remember, you called me up about 3 days ago and said,
That's not what I remember.
oh, what do you remember?
That's similar.
Similar, okay, great.
And you certainly, at the very least, deserve a Catalyst Award because you
I'll take
were
the assist.
very
I'll take the assist.
important in this. My memory of it is, and again, I didn't remember Portland, but Portland makes a lot more sense that we met because again, I don't know why I would have been in Seattle twice. Even once is kind of a stretch.
I'll explain that. I'll explain that. Yeah.
But I remember you saying that you wanted you rejected Robo Rally on the basis that it was too expensive to put together.
Yes.
Like a board game is daunting, or was certainly daunting in those days.
Very daunting to me.
These days it's a lot easier. But getting together not only the components of it, but then getting them into the box and getting the art and everything else is just it's a lot more going on in that than a book.
Right. Yeah. And we were struggling to make books.
Yeah.
And a board game has a book.
Yeah.
Plus a whole bunch of other stuff.
It's pretty clear that it was harder. It was going to be harder.
Yeah.
And I respected that, and I took that as I took your interest in the game as genuine. You said you would
I
publish
love the
it
game
later,
for sure.
And when I remember that you said I want something cheaper to make,
Right.
because that was the reason why we weren't going there, and something fast that you could play in line at conventions.
Yes.
So you saw this opportunity because people at Gen Con and other conventions would be waiting for their event, and they'd be standing in line, and they might be there for 40 minutes or something like that.
Right.
And so having a game you could play online would be great. It was
Right.
an opportunity you saw.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is I saw I was noticing that I was a big fan of NorwestCon, which is a local science fiction fantasy convention. I would go there and I would see all this art that was not being published. And in the gaming industry at the time, there was very limited vehicles. There were very limited vehicles for publishing fantasy color art, especially. Most of it was black and white, inside role-playing books. The cover would be art and stuff like that. So I thought, a card game that we could publish a lot of art. I think I could get art reasonably cost effectively because there was so much art not getting published, right? So you called me up about 3 days later, and I mentioned also that the next weekend was Dragonflight, so that's the Seattle connection. You called me up about 3 days later and said, hey, I have an idea that I think fits the bill, something like that. And how about if I come up to Dragonflight next weekend? We can hang out, play games, and I'll tell you about the idea. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. So I remember picking you up at the Amtrak station. You came up by train.
I do remember that.
Yep, with Kim McLaughlin.
Yes.
And we picked you up, and
Was Mike there?
No, you came up alone.
Okay.
You did not come up with Mike. I don't know if he'd gone back home or what.
I think he had.
Yeah, so you came up, and I picked you up in my old pickup, an old Dodge 57 pickup that I inherited from my grandfather. The thing had such loose steering that you could go like this, and the truck would just keep going straight. You had to go like this, then it would start to turn. Anyway,
I think that's the only car I ever ran out of gas on. I forget why I was driving it, but it ran out, and
you were driving my Dodge pickup?
I was driving a truck of yours, and it was back in the day. I don't know whether it was that truck in particular.
Yeah, I only had one, so it had to have been my Dodge. I don't remember you driving my Dodge.
You'll be able to verify this or not, but I remember that it ran out of gas, even though there was gas in the tank. It looked like.
Yes, the gas gauge didn't work. That's true.
And it turned out later that it had like a second tank, and I had to switch something. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so this was your trick. Yeah. So once I flipped that switch, I was good to go.
Yeah. Might need to just call me on your cell phone. Okay, so we gotta get. Okay, so we go. So you come up and you tell me this. I pick you up with Kim McLaughlin. We were in a parking garage and we went there because Ken had to go pick up a check. It was right by Seattle Center. Kim goes in, pick up a check, and while we're waiting for him in this parking garage, we get out of the pickup and we're kind of just standing there waiting for Ken. And you go, well, do you want to hear my idea?
Oh, jeez.
And so you explained the core concept of Magic the Gathering. You know, it's a trading card. You know, the idea of a trading card game. It's this game with lots of cards, and you build decks. Everybody has their own cards, and you play your deck against somebody else. But this huge idea, and we started hooping and hollering. And I remember us hooping and hollering in this parking garage because out of excitement, and it's echoing through the parking garage, and poor Ken's running back thinking that I ran over you in the pickup or something like that. And so then we tell Ken the idea, and then all three of us are hooping and hollering, and we're like, wow, that's. You remember that?
I do remember that.
Ah, good.
Yes, and I should say that the point when I came up with this concept was at Multnomah Falls in Portland. I remember I was there with my mother and Mike Davis, and it's one of the few ideas, maybe certainly the only major idea that's ever come to me in a eureka moment. Like most of the time, most of my game design is evolutionary, not revolutionary. I work and slowly improve things and tweak rules and do iterative design, and I can usually trace the origin of my ideas a lot. This one seemed to come out of nowhere. Was that the idea which just swept me away, which was that not all players had to have the same equipment.
Right. Wow.
And a really something that always wakes me up when I think about that time is when I told you about that idea there, it wasn't attached to Magic. It wasn't attached to any particular game.
Right.
And I remember saying that we shouldn't get too excited because it may not even be possible to design such a game.
Right.
Which is always sort of amazes me because it's so ubiquitous now, and so it is like there's so many examples of trading card games and also the second order effects of trading card games like deck building games and whatever digital trading card games and things like that. That the idea that you might not be able to do it seems like it seems crazy, like especially for somebody who specializes in learning all games, right?
Right.
And but I said, look, when if you were playing chess and you were allowed to choose your own pieces, that wouldn't be necessarily as fun as chess. If you were playing poker and you were allowed to choose your cards, it wouldn't necessarily be as fun as poker. And sort of I was going through all these things, and the only thing I could think of was with miniatures games, you could choose your army based on a price cost, but I didn't really want people adding up prices on a game and so forth, and so that seemed different than what I wanted, which was something where you just have a deck and you play.
Right. So you were at Multnomah Falls.
I was.
Were you like up on that little bridge? It's about a fourth of the way up, staring down into the water.
I think I was walking up towards that area.
Walking up towards it with Mike and you said your mother.
Yeah. Maybe my sister.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna. Yeah. I mean, it was funny. It was one of the questions. Is like, when was it a eureka moment? It happened so fast. I figured it kind of had to be.
Yeah.
I have this thing where frequently at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll wake up with this fantastic idea. Turns out it's not.
Yeah. Right.
But at 3 a.m. I think, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I get up and I have to go type it down. I'll get up. If I just lay there, I can't get back to sleep. But if I go type it, then go back to bed, I can go to sleep. And then when I wake up later in the morning, I'm like, what is this rubbish?
But for some reason, this idea, which sounds like a very big idea, didn't intimidate you as much as making Robo Rally, because it was cards and it was something you felt like you could move forward with.
Which actually, this turned out and was probably on the surface of it, obviously harder than Robo Rally.
Yeah.
I think that, but it was the opportunity too. I mean, Robo Rally, we loved Robo Rally, but
it's a board game.
It's another board game,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it is a good board game. We love board, but it wasn't gonna set the world on fire like Magic did, right? And so I think it was this. Well, for me personally, I always remember back to 1978, and the first time that I realized what a role-playing game was. First time I played Dungeons and Dragons, and had this eureka moment of, oh my God. Everything I knew about what games were just got turned upside down on its head. And it was that moment again.
Wow, I had exactly that moment with Dungeons and Dragons. That's what made me a board gamer, or a game player. Right. And it was almost exactly in '78 as well.
Oh.
Yeah, wow. So did you, how long did it take you to, so did you spend because when you came to me, now it's going to be 3 or 4 days later, because it was in the middle of the week, then you came up to Seattle and we got together and we talked about this and got all crazy and hooping and hollering and stuff like that. But like you said, at that point in time, you didn't know if it was a fantasy theme or anything. You didn't know it had anything to do with magic.
Right, I didn't, and I didn't even, as I said, know if it was possible to make such a game. Right. So I think I was thinking about it as cards. Because of our conversation, I wanted to make something cheap, and cards seemed to be as lightweight as you could get. And I know that between that meeting and the first prototype of Magic, which my memory was, less than 2 months, maybe closer than a month. But between then, I did several prototypes which involved other themes. Lock picking, for example, or something like that, and once I came up with the Magic theme, it was perfect, and it was also well fleshed out as far as flavor goes, because I'd been working on Magic themed card games for a long time. It was one of the
Five Magics.
Yeah. One of the many sort of games that I had been developing off and on, and so there were maybe 20 different versions of Five Magics, and none of them had been worth playing more than twice. That's one of the ways I like to design games is we play the game. It's fun. It's not worth playing a second time that way, but I have a lot of fun playing with the first random game and sort of seeing how it works. And so I've done that a lot with Five Magics. But because of that, I had this sort of fleshed out world, this relationship between lands and creatures and spells, and the relationship between the different colors of magic, the red, the blue. Right. I had this sort of dynamic, which was already fleshed out in a lot of ways, and so there's a lot of stuff which came for free once I attached it to that chassis.
Right. so when you hit upon after experimenting with several themes, and you hit upon magic as the theme, and you were able to tap into what you've done with Five Magic in terms of the style and the theme, everything like that. Did it come pretty quickly, this idea of well, you already knew you wanted to have a deck of cards. A player has a deck. The idea of lands, like sources of magic and spells of magic, like was that something that came from Five Magics, or
Yes.
is that
Yeah. I mean, in a variety of different ways. I don't think in any of the versions of Five Magic there were lands in your deck. I think they were always things that were out, like on a board, and you were competing over. Right. So, like, you'd move your creature over here, and now you've got the swamp, and you sort of invest energy in the swamp, and now you get black energy back to do something else. And,
Right.
But there may have been versions with the lands built in as well, but I don't remember. I know that one of the reasons that it was called Magic to begin with was because I adored this game, Cosmic Encounter. Still adore it.
Yeah.
And Cosmic Encounter, the first time I played it, I was not particularly impressed. But then the second time I played it, it was completely different. And the third time I played it was completely different again. And I just was swept up with it. I just loved it, because after that is like, wow, who knows what's possible with this game. So I had sort of one of the things I love best in games is where you just don't know where things are going to go. And I thought, wouldn't it be terrific if you had a game where every card broke the rules rather than just each person having one or two ways to break the rules. And then I thought that sounded to me like my model for what Magic is like. Because I'd done a lot of role-playing and role-playing design too. I never did it seriously with the idea of being published, but I worked a lot on magic systems and things like that. And one of the things I really liked about a good magic system was that it was really that everything logically followed from basic premises, but it was filled with the unexpected at the same time. And so that felt to me what was going on with these sort of games that are massively modular, where you can figure everything out, but you can't really anticipate anything unless you really are a wizard.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. And Richard, not supposed to reveal that. Yes, part of the creation myth continues.
Untold stories.
Wizard Coast started by real wizards. Okay, so we got to move forward into our topic. So I want to. Please.
Just take a little thing about a moment to say something which is important to me about today's games. Is actually there's so many games out there. I keep on coming back to this idea that we don't play a particular game enough. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of this. Like I have to know all the games that are out there. I always have, but because of that, I find myself playing games I know less and less, and playing a particular game less and less. And I think that's tragic. I've been trying to sort of correct that behavior in myself and still have time to play a lot of new games. But you hear my descriptions of things like Cosmic Encounter. What made it amazing? I played it the first time, not impressed. Second time, totally different. Third time, I'm hooked. If you only play a game once, you can't understand that.
Yeah. No, I totally get you. You were over at our house last week, and I've got a modest collection compared to you, but I've got, it's a nice collection of games.
It's very nice.
And we just look at if we played in like half the games we haven't played in a year, right? And we only keep the ones we like. I mean, not every game on that shelf is a game that we intend to play again, right? But yeah, that's really tough. So I want to talk a little bit about. I think that you get. Well, anything else you want to say about Origin, sort of the origin story before we move on to our topics? Because I was trying to think of what we could talk about. I know you get I imagine a lot of your interviews are more about the game and about the design of the game and other games that you've done. Like, remember working on this particular card. But I think that you and I also had a really important business relationship as at Wizards. And I think I find questions like that come up that I think that maybe don't get much attention. Do you you have a choice, maybe at multiple points, a choice to make about whether or not to take Magic the Gathering, cast your lot in with me, with Wizards of the Coast, or take this idea somewhere else, or do it differently, or do it yourself, or something. Did you have conversations like that with, say, Mike Davis or?
No. Not. Well, I was still in the frame of mind. I wasn't going into game design, and Mike was in charge of this relationship, and I didn't want to deal with big companies. The idea of selling them a company. I mean, if you decided not to do it, I was excited about it enough. I would have found alternatives.
Right.
But there's no way I'm going to do a game myself.
Right.
I mean, that's almost true today, and it's, I don't know, a million times easier today to do a game than it was back then.
Right.
But yeah, I have to get a publisher involved, and you were enthusiastic, and really, I had such low regard about the possibility, like getting somebody to take a game seriously.
Well, and I suppose that worked to my advantage, that you'd had this bad experience getting Robo Rally published. It probably helped my position.
I'm sure it did. Yeah. Well, although it should be said that I didn't have any bad experience. Mike did. I mean, I indirectly did.
Right.
But I went into this sort of having done a little bit of research and knowing this was this was not a place to stake your future. That the game industry, and part of my data for that was I know that it's notoriously difficult to be a writer successfully. Or any entertainment property is probably true, but writing was one that interested me. And every week there's a different top 20 list of new books out there, and lists of famous authors and so forth. And I tried to figure out what the analog for games was, and it's just crap. It's like awful, right? It's like you get the top 20 games of all time, and you start getting to number 12 and 13, and my parents don't even recognize it. And that's it was like there was not in those days, at least. These are the New York Times best-selling games for the last week. It's like so, games must have been orders of magnitude more difficult to make a living at than being an author. And so anyway, I went into it fully knowing how bad it was. Mike experienced it firsthand, and I just sat back saying, "Oh yes, this confirms all my knowledge."
I have to do a quick sidebar here.
Yes,
I love your story, like you and your crew at Boeing, like, oh, we're gonna go leave Boeing, we're gonna leave our stable jobs, and talking to your parents, and they're like, I don't know about this. And then Richard over here is like, I'm gonna go in academia. I'm gonna have a logical choice for like the career that's most likely to support me.
I mean, that is true. Although I wouldn't necessarily have criticized Peter's approach either, because his was to make a business out of this, and there's a lot of business opportunity in games. I believe that. I believe games could be what they've become. I believe they could be bigger still. But I wasn't interested in going into business. I was interested in being a game designer, and so that's a bit of a different thing.
But it was my dad certainly had words to say about me leaving Boeing, big company, retirement plans, and all that stuff to be an entrepreneur. That was so your relationship that you had with Mike Davis was very important, not only in terms of Robo Rally, but that relationship you had with him, of him being essentially your agent, really, in some sense, continued into Magic the Gathering, because Mike ended up taking sort of the position of representing your interests in the various negotiations that happened. One thing, the Wizards of the Coast, a challenge we were facing with Wizards, which was just role-playing. This we're talking about our first conversation was 1991, but as we're going into 1992, into looking at 1993, when we published through this process, Wizards, we were in a lawsuit that threatened our existence through some bad decisions of mine.
Had that lawsuit, was that on the radar when we first talked or not?
I don't think it was No, it was not, because that didn't happen until 1990. It was a year later, because that didn't happen until after we published the Primal Order.
Yeah.
And so Mike Davis was very concerned about that, and him and I talked about how his concerns about taking a game to Wizards when Wizards was faced with this problem, and how the game could be lost in a lawsuit as an asset. If we went out of business, it could end up owned by another company. And so we started Garfield Games.
Yes.
Yes, and so we created a separate entity that ended up owning Magic the Gathering with a publishing relationship with Wizards of the Coast. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I don't know how much. Did you have interest? You have conversations with Mike? Do you remember conversations with Mike about this topic?
Yes.
Well, good. I'm not just making it up. Yeah.
No, he really. I let him take care of the business, and he told me what was going on at all the steps, and it all seemed sensible to me.
Yep. Yeah. So that was. I think some people know about, you'll see some old advertisements. There are places where Garfield Games shows up, and that's kind of the history as to why that was happened. And then eventually we resolved our problems with Palladium. We came out with Magic the Gathering. It was a big hit, and we merged the companies together.
So to spell it out for people, what Mike was concerned with, and probably you, was that we published this game through Wizards, which we think has a lot of potential in Magic the Gathering, and then Palladium ends up doing really well in their lawsuit, and they end up owning Magic, and so we tried to separate that.
We did separate. Yeah,
we did.
We did separate. So we created that was the background on that. So you ended up being, after we merged the companies, you ended up being on the board of directors.
Yes.
With me at Wizards.
Right.
So
put board back into board of directors. I spent a lot of time board.
You don't have any riveting stories from
I
the board group?
I do, but it's like they say war is where it was lots and lots of boredom with moments of terror.
Yes, yeah. Or so the I think it's interesting to go towards the end of our story at Wizards and talk about how we ended things at Wizards. We ultimately made the decision to sell the company.
Well, there is something that I just thought of recently, which we might also want to talk about, is the patent.
Yes.
Like the patent is a really, I often think about that and what we were thinking, and recently I did this game Keyforge, and it strikes me as being as patentable as Magic was. And there was no interest in Fantasy Flight, and whatever reasons I had for it originally had disappeared. So some people have contacted me and said, "Can we do a unique deck game? Do they own any patents?" And I was like, "No."
Yeah. So but the patent Wizards did. We did a patent on, loosely on the concept of a trading card game.
Yeah.
But more specifically, I think on the tapping
Because
mechanic.
Right. There was a lot of discussions about what was patentable here.
Right.
Because games are notoriously difficult to protect.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of protection in the game industry comes from the fact that until now, most actors in the game industry, the people who are designing games and the people who are publishing games, are driven by love of games and wanting to create things, and so there really wasn't that much theft of ideas. I mean, it did happen, but it wasn't that bad. But at the same time, if you put out a game and somebody just changes one rule, it's their game.
Right. Well, and you see things like going back to Monopoly riff-offs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we did patent, and it ended up being something that was a big source of revenue for Wizards. We got patent income from Konami for Yu-Gi-Oh. We got patent revenue from a couple other trading card game companies. And I know that the ownership of the patent was instrumental in Pokemon deciding to work with us
Yes.
for distribution of Pokemon outside Japan, which something we did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and one interesting thing, I do think about that from time to time because I've got mixed feelings on the patents and patents in general.
Right.
My background, and I do not, I'm not going on record saying I didn't support the patent. I was part of that, and that was fine. But my general philosophical background on games is that it's like mathematics. You work together, and like I make something, and other people draw on it, and they make new things, and there are techniques I use, and it's a wonderful thing we're all building together. And patents kind of work against that,
Right.
or at least on the surface of it they do. And then there were some things which were sort of hazy about like to me there was something very original being brought to the table by a game like Magic, but that wasn't tapping.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
it felt dishonest on that level. The trading card method of play, that there was some honesty there, but I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure what was just done legally and what wasn't. But what I pictured as being the case was that if, like, I've played many games, many games I loved, good games that weren't successful.
Right.
And so there's this fear that you come out with something like a Magic, and you publish it with a Wizards of the Coast, and it comes out and it doesn't do well for any of a million different reasons. We got lucky in so many ways, and we our skill helped increase those percentages, but it was very easy to picture it not working.
Right.
And then TSR, which to my mind was a megalith at that time, could have just said, "Oh, that's a great idea," and then do their own, and suddenly they own trading card games, and that was what drove, for me, the trading card game, the patent.
Interest in the patent. Yeah, we did have a lot of. It takes me back to some of the early discussions we had where. We did not assume that Magic was going to be the main.
That's true.
Game. Like we
That's why
thought,
Deckmaster is on the back of a Magic card right now.
right? Because
Right.
yeah,
Because whatever you put on the back is there forever.
Yeah.
And we thought that it was going to be the Deckmaster line of trading card games.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that Magic would be like a theme. I remember there's a classic picture of us in the University of Pennsylvania with a chalkboard in the back with Charlie and Scaff, and everybody's there. Lisa and Jesper are out there for it. And in the back it says Talislanta up there on the chalk. Like we actually thought about doing a Talislanta trading, or it was, we did do one for Vampire the Masquerade, we did one for Battletech, we did one for Netrunner. It's pretty amazing that the first trading card game ended up being so dominant, so pivotal, still so powerful. Like, what do you think? I mean, what do you think that? Why do you think that is?
I think we got lucky in a lot of different ways, and I think the obviously first mover.
Yes,
First mover, like the first time you do something like this, if it's successful, it's likely to get entrenched. And with Magic, with a trading card game more than a lot of games, because getting entrenched with a game like Magic, you get not only an intellectual investment, and I learned all these cards and these rules, but I also have a monetary investment. I own this stuff, right? And so you become more and more entrenched. But there is more going on in the next 3 trading card games that I worked on. First, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, then Netrunner, then Battletech. I realized that a lot of the things that I thought were problems in Magic were actually strengths. And and that either by luck or by intuition, I had gotten the right answer with, or at least a good enough answer the first time. And so example, I mean, there's lots of examples of that, but take Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, which is coming out. I heard they're making a new version this year, and the fans of it love it, and it's I'm very happy with the game.
Right.
But that game was designed to a standard of board games in that the amount of time it took to play was about half an hour, or even more, 40 minutes per person. Right, and so you get a 4-person game, and you're talking say 3 hours, right? And for a board game, back in those days, these days that's a little long for a 4-person board game, but there's still people who will do that. But
Some
back
of
in those
which
days,
are in this very room. Yes.
but back in those days, that was you wouldn't blink an eye at that for a hobby board game. It was you wouldn't call it short, but you wouldn't call it long. I played lots of longer games. But for a trading card game, it was not good at all. And it took me a bit to realize why, and it's because so much of the value in trading card games comes from I play, and then I play again and see how it does this time, and then I tinker with the deck and I play again, right? This iterated play was very important.
Right.
And so after that, our standards for what the length of that game should be, just like until then, we thought should be just like board games, but it wasn't. It was something different. And then in Netrunner, I took out the mana because a lot of people didn't like the mana in Magic, and that it made a lot of swinginess. And again, there's a lot of people who love Netrunner. I think it's an excellent game, although I don't think it's at its best as a trading card game. I think it would be better in a different form. But mana turned out to bring something to the table which I hadn't anticipated. The fact that 40% of your deck you could immediately evaluate in Magic was a strength. In Netrunner, your hand was smaller, but every mana card you had to read. It's like, oh, I do this, and then I do this, and then, okay, I think I understand how that works. Oh, this one, there's like there was nothing easy. There was no easy cards.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah, that's
Do we have some chat?
No, I was laughing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
yeah, no, it's
Not
not
easy.
Right.
Questions though when you're ready.
Yeah, well, if you're go ahead. Here's with a question from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter, do you mind explaining the question so everyone can hear us?
Yes, I will.
Okay, so the first question is kind of like when you were really in the weeds developing Magic, how did Scaff and Bill contribute to developing what became Magic?
So the question is, the help that you got in designing Magic, take us back to the development days, the playtest days, Scaff, Bill Rose, Jim Lynn, these legends in gaming history now.
I like the way I heard the question the first time when I was in the weeds.
In the weeds.
In the weeds.
How did they help? Yeah.
Is that one of them who posted the question? They're like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
In the weeds.
Back in the day, with the original playtest of Magic, there were many groups that contributed and became very attached to the concept. I had, I don't know, 30 or 40 playtesters, and then I know Peter had a bunch, and then there was even a bunch in Atlanta. I think some of Mike's friends played in Atlanta, or maybe Lisa had some connection there. But in any case, my playtesters fell into two large groups. One was the people who were around the math department and the physics department, which was with Scaff and Jim and Dave Petty and 15 other people. And then the other was around the bridge, the Penn Bridge Club. They were all people who had some association with Penn. They may have gone to Penn as undergraduate. They may work at Penn currently, which was the case with Bill Rose, who head of R&D for a long time at Wizards. And so that was the other big group.
Yep.
And these two groups set a lot of the standards for how the game worked, and they gave put a lot of heart into and thought into how it should develop, what made a good set, what made a bad set, and they were often completely the opposite point of view. They fought like cats and dogs, and to be sure, Bill was the cat, and Bill represented the cats, and they represented the dogs. Scaff did,
Yes.
but and I often found, and I was the final arbiter on all this stuff, for quite a while, and I found myself in the position often of, if you do this, the game is doomed. And
Yes.
somebody else saying, if you don't do this, the game is doomed.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And,
Yes.
and so to try to figure out which one of those points of view was correct, or whether there was some way to satisfy both parties with a third solution that we hadn't anticipated. I leaned on my developers quite a lot in many different ways, not only on particular cards, but on the way they all fit together.
But it was clear that they were just amazing. I mean, like, we were doing playtest, the playtesting we were doing in the office in Seattle. We never caught up. I mean, I felt like we played the game, but we were never able to provide as much substantive input, critique because you were with those guys and doing it interactively. Work day to day, right in the thick of it. We just anyway. That was. Does that answer the question? Yeah, probably. Yeah. Good enough, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's fascinating, showing the combination, like the math, the heavy analytical side, and then the bridge side, like you were saying, more traditional card games. Like these people are used to playing games over and over and over again, and really like getting a rhythm to it. So.
Yeah, and those foundations really contributed to our ability to make this into, to get the Pro Tour to work in the first place. Like it's hard to imagine we would have gotten there without this, taking just the minutia of the game so seriously, and the balance of the game. Right. Even if we ignored the balance for one reason or another, like a lot of people don't understand that when the game was launched, we knew there were decks that would go infinite and so forth. We just didn't think that they needed to be controlled because people wouldn't get that many cards. Right, we weren't right about everything.
Right,
right. But B, it's like I played lots and lots of games where Cosmic Encounter, where there's broken combinations. You sit down, you play, you win, and then you move. You play a different combination.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And just house rules and so forth. So we didn't feel like this was a problem.
So I was I think I know your answer to this question just based on what you just said. But I was asked this question recently by I think it was Brian Weissman, who said, the broken cards of early Magic, the Lotuses, the Moxes, the Time Walks, Ancestral Recalls, and so on. Those were a good thing for the game. I mean, that's what I believe. That's what he asked me, whether do you think that were those cards a mistake? I mean, in some level, at the time, maybe we could. I think there might have been a period where we thought it was a mistake to have it because we ended up banning these cards. But it added so much to the mystique of the game. And now, even now that we're 25, 30 years later, the fact that these cards existed. And have such a high economic value, there's a good with a bad there. It adds a mystique to the game.
Yeah, it does. And what people don't understand often when they look back at it there is just how rudimentary people's play level was. Now, ours was actually reasonably good. It wasn't until the Pro Tour was in progress, I think, that we didn't have the best players in the world at Wizards. And by far, right? Like, but once the Pro Tour was underway, that was no longer the case.
Right.
So then you have to ask yourself, what you've got, what you're going to balance the game for. Who are you balancing the game for? And this is an ongoing of real interest to me these days. How do it's like how should I balance my games? And the thing is, there's a lot of people who think you should balance your game for the top player, which I think is misguided and almost has a bunch of hubris in the whole idea. Because first of all, not all your players are top-level players. In fact, a small group will be, and if you balance it for them, there's a good chance none of them are going to convert. Second of all, you don't even know what the top level is if unless your game is pretty shallow, right? It's like it's really hard to play a game perfectly, and to know that going in, what the perfect game is ahead of time means you're dealing with a pretty shallow game, I think. And so I think these cards made the game balanced well for beginners at that time. Not for beginners, even for intermediate players at that time.
Yeah.
There was a tournament I remember Dave Petty telling me about. It was I think the first place they ran a Rochester draft, so probably Rochester, and they were being helped by people there, and they were doing this draft where everybody was picking cards. Rochester draft, all the cards are on the table, and you take turns picking them. And he said it looked like the only person there who knew what was going on at high level play was one of the people who were helping out with this tournament, and all the players seemed to be playing randomly. And in particular, there was a Black Lotus out there, this will tell you how long ago it was, that just wasn't picked for a long time. And it just sat there. And it's because back in the day, that's just like, it's not as good as a land. A land you can keep using forever. A Black Lotus, one time, gone.
Yeah, right.
So that after,
What's the use of that?
So then after, Dave says he's talking to this guy, and he's saying, I can't believe they didn't pick that Black Lotus. And the other guy goes, yeah, it's crazy they didn't pick it. And he goes, I love Black Lotus. First turn, bam, 3 walls of wood, bam, bam, bam.
Take that. Get across that.
So the thing is, you've got these cards here, and people, should they be balanced for the top level player, or should they be balanced for all these people who are playing the game? And,
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like we just scratched the surface and we're running out of time here. We will not be talking about the business issues. You can, everybody, the panic alert is off. We will not get into that sort of stuff. I got to ask you a couple of sort of canned questions that I like to end off of. So when you reflect back on this magical time that we had together. Not the last hour, I'm talking about the 90s.
I thought you were going to do a montage there of this the last 40 minutes.
Yes. So what, when you think back about it, all these years later, what are you most proud of? What do you feel like, what did you really take away from that experience that you've taken into your life since then, that you still incorporate into who you are as Richard Garfield, and how magic changed you, or the Wizard of the Coast?
Well, I mean, I always believed that the games had this incredible untapped potential. I believed that from the moment I first played Dungeons and Dragons. It was like that was a light switch, which sounds like it was for you as well.
It was, yeah.
And it's still the game I think is the most innovative game of all time, and I couldn't believe the potential that games had back there that it seemed like hadn't been reached, and so I think that that time really cemented this idea that I was absolutely correct in that there was incredible potential there with games, and that it was way beyond just entertainment. Like the educational value of games, of course, is very high, but there was also this like throughout the 90s and through to today, people come up and talk about how important Magic was in particular to them, but games in general. I hear this said about all the time, about how valuable it was for them to learn to socialize, to their child learned to read that way. They were depressed, they didn't have any friends, they made these connections, and games have such value to people. I think that really, I believed that before then, but I really knew it after the 90s.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a powerful point to end on. I feel like I'm so sorry this was so short.
Yeah.
We,
How is
we
it done
barely
already?
scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Can we go another hour? No, just kidding. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
It was great to hang out with you again. Yes, thanks to our guest, Richard Garfield, for joining us today. Thank you to Emma Larkins for being our co-host today. Thanks, Kristen Jensen's our producer, Will Geisler is our technical director, and Dominic Lewis is our events coordinator. And our new gaffer, we're going to see.
Upgrade.
All right. We will be back again in a week, where I believe our guest is going to be David Hoppy next week, president of Gen Con.
Nods from the tech crew.
Yeah. And but if you can't wait a week to catch more Gen Con TV, come back on Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific time for the Brothers Murph, or even before that, Fridays at 11 a.m. for Table Takes. Emma, are you going to be back?
I'll be here, yeah. Talking about all the news. We're the view of board games, apparently.
Yes,
So,
that's
yeah.
right. So, and thank you, our audience, for coming and watching, and appreciate your patronage for the show. And we'll see you around. Bye.